Welcome to Trendster.
Man who was never meant to rule, a president who inherited power but not the love of his people, a leader whose reign is written in blood and survival. This is the story of Bashar al-Assad, how he went from an eye doctor in London to one of the most controversial figures of the 21st century. To understand Bashar al-Assad, we must first understand the man who built the empire he would inherit, his father, Hafez al-Assad. Hafez al-Assad took power in 1970 through a bloodless coup, installing himself as Syria's undisputed leader. He ruled Syria for 30 years, establishing a strict police state and a cult of personality. His government crushed opposition, most notably in Hama in 1982, when the Syrian army massacred an estimated 10,000 to 40,000 civilians to suppress an uprising by the Muslim Brotherhood. But every ruler needs an heir. And for years, that heir was Bashar al-Assad, the golden boy, the military commander, and Hafez's chosen successor. Meanwhile, Bashar was different, quiet, bookish, and uninterested in politics. He studied medicine in Damascus and later trained as an ophthalmologist in London, far from Syria's brutal political landscape. But everything changed in 1994. With Bashar gone, Hafez had no choice. Bashar was recalled to Syria, enrolled in military school and trained to rule. In just 6 years, he transformed from an eye doctor into a dictator in waiting. On June 10, 2000, Hafez al-Assad died. And within hours, Syria's parliament lowered the presidential age requirement from 40 to 34, just in time for Bashar to take over. In July 2000, Bashar won a referendum with 99.7% of the vote, a classic hallmark of an authoritarian regime. At his inauguration, he promised reforms, modernization, and an end to the corruption that plagued Syria under his father. The world watched with cautious optimism. Would Bashar be a reformer, or just another dictator? For a brief moment, change seemed possible. Bashar allowed limited political debates, introduced new economic reforms, and expanded internet access. This period became known as the Damascus Spring. Syria's GDP grew by 5% annually in the early 2000s. Tourism and trade expanded with foreign investment from China, Russia, and Gulf nations. Political dissidents were released from prison and independent newspapers emerged. But the spring didn't last. Within a year, activists were arrested, political discussions were shut down, and the intelligence agencies Mukhabarat tightened their grip. The old regime was back. By 2005, at least 600 political activists and journalists had been arrested. The government banned the Muslim Brotherhood and cracked down on Kurdish activists. Corruption deepened. By 2010, 60% of Syria's economy was controlled by elites linked to Assad's family. Syria was a ticking time bomb, and in 2011, it finally exploded. Inspired by revolutions across the Arab world, Syrians took to the streets, demanding democracy. But Bashar al-Assad had no intention of stepping down. The uprising turned into a war that would claim over 500,000 lives and displace 12 million Syrians, making it the worst humanitarian crisis of the 21st century. The first protests erupt in Daraa. Security forces respond with gunfire. The Free Syrian Army forms. Syria descends into full-scale war. Reports emerge of chemical attacks in Ghouta, over 400 civilians killed. The world accuses Assad. ISIS takes control of large parts of Syria, turning the war into a multi-front nightmare. Russia intervenes, bombing rebel-held cities and securing Assad's grip on power. The war became a battleground for global powers. The US, Turkey, and Gulf states backed the rebels. Russia and Iran backed Assad. The war destroyed entire cities, Homs, Aleppo, Raqqa, turning Syria into a wasteland. Despite sanctions, war crimes allegations, and global condemnation, Bashar al-Assad remains in power. He has outlasted enemies, crushed opposition, and ensured his survival at the cost of his country. 90% of Syrians now live in poverty. Over 6 million Syrian refugees remain displaced. Syria's economy has collapsed. Its GDP has shrunk by 60% since 2011. Will history remember him as a survivor or a war criminal? One thing is certain. His rule has left Syria forever changed.